Greetings, folks. This is Scott at the Game Audio Institute, and we are back with our Constellation Journey development log once again on our weekly basis, sort of like. Anyway, I have a lot of I've got a few things to talk about, and we have made some successes. I've actually been tinkering a little bit before we started this recording, but I just wanted to sort of show you kind of what progress has been made. We've got a nicer sound thing going on. We've got some things on the agenda that we're going to plan on, and I think it's all going to be pretty capable to do. But let's just get into it. So the last that we left off, our fearless sequencer was tootling along pretty well. It was at a low pitch. We really weren't specifying an actual frequency, so it was actually just coming out at whatever the default frequency is whenever you set up a oscillator in Chuck, essentially. I did actually change a couple things that was interesting, though. Under project settings, this is a good idea to do for any kind of audio-oriented app, but can't quite see this that well. But if you go to the audio, there's a function here called best latency right there. So there's lots of different kinds of things. So the best latency is the one here. There's default, there's good latency, and best performance. Best performance is probably going to give you the most substantial latency, whereas best latency is going to give you the best latency. Now that's best audio latency, right? Which means that like potentially then the visuals might lag. But in the case of having an audio sequencer, music sequencer, you kind of want that if there was going to be a lag of some kind, you would not want the lag to be in audio, right? You would not want to have the timing be interrupted or things like that. So we got that, and we also edited our script a little tiny bit in Chuck to be able to do some cool things. It's really pretty easy to do this in Chuck. It's actually quite, it's not too hard to understand, and I'm really enjoying, just sort of messing around with it. It's a very tinkery, friendly language, it feels like to me anyway. Of course, having a bit of a script background, it helps a little bit. What I ended up doing was changing a little bit of this information here, and we're going to change it even a little bit more after this. But basically what it is you have sine osc foo. Okay, so in other words, it sets up this oscillator called foo. And then what I did is when you see this sign right after that, that's the Chuck sign, right? That means you're basically putting it into or sending it to or connecting it to thing. So what happens is I'm basically now creating an ADSR called ENV. So that ADSR is something you can use. And then that is eventually going to go out to DAC. And then what happens is you want to set the envelope for the various characteristics that you're going to have. And this is milliseconds. So it's 5 millisecond attack. You have 100 millisecond decay, 100 millisecond release. And I chose it to have no sustain. So just to have a very quick little deet, 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 deet. And then you're going to have the key on event essentially. And then this foo frequency. Now that number right there is just 1000 hertz. And we've got some cool things that we can do so that we can actually play MIDI notes and not actually like frequencies. So that's really cool. This 03 second to now is essentially the timing of the actual gate time, if you will, for the oscillator. The oscillator is going to play on for 0.3 of a second. And all that stuff is slightly longer than these. So in other words, what's going to happen then is I'm taking the output of the envelope and then sending it to the DAC, the digital audio converter, basically. So that is what's basically doing that. Now, so this factor, that's going to be a variable. So just like what we said, while true, if enable node equals 1, spork play note, all that sort of stuff, we're going to have this also be a global variable here on the thing. Now, what I don't know, when they say global, I don't know if that means it's global for this instance or if it means it's actually global and they're going to fight with each other. Because one of the things that we're going to try to do today is we're going to try and duplicate our row so that we have more than one row so that we can then play around with potentially having that row be at different rhythmic values, essentially. And that's also going to be something we have to worry about. And I think there might be a way to convert millisecond intervals to beat values and things like that. So we'll figure how that goes, although that may not happen in this run. And then also we're going to do a quick one thing right here, which is just to be able to make it so that when I click on the thing during the gameplay, I can just like drag over this with a mouse and enable or disable any of the things that I want. That's what I'm thinking about. Okay, so for that, it looks like I'm going to need myself a some kind of event system, most likely. And so let's get that going here. So I'm gonna basically create an event system. So under game object, I don't know if it'll have an event system. There's a UI system here. Oh, there is an event system. Yeah, these are not UI objects, but I think it should still work. But we'll find out. So the next thing I think I would need to do is on each of the individual items in the sequence row, which have a collider and they have a mesh renderer. What I want to do is probably just take this one object right here. Oh, sorry. That'd be, I think, this object. Yep, that's it right there. So on this component, I'm going to add myself an event trigger. What I don't know is whether or not this will automatically work or not. Add new event type. Now I'm going to add this as... Yeah, it's going to have to be an interesting thing because I can definitely do on mouse down on the object and then also do pointer enter. So that's going to be the equivalent of a drag, I think. So pointer enter while mouse is down. I think that seems logical to me. And we'll see how that's going to work for this situation. And then the idea is that it would just change a Boolean, and the Boolean would just simply change the mesh renderer on and off. Pretty basic stuff. No, nothing really hardcore. So we'll do a pointer enter, and it needs to call its own script on its own thing, which we haven't even talked about what it's going to call. So we should probably get into actually making a script to apply to all of these cubes. And eventually what we would do is we'll apply this to the prefab and everything will be there. I'm going to add myself a script. New script. And we'll just call this mesh visibility. Or how about this? Maybe mesh render control. How about that? That's better. Mesh render control. Like so. Mesh render control. Renderer control. Create an add. And that means it's going to be adding to all of these objects at one time. So whatever we're doing the same thing. And we'll go here. And it's pretty easy to do because we already have the mesh renderer happening. We can refer to itself. What we want to do is make it so that we are hitting a public void. Mesh enable. Or render enable. How about that? Render enable. Render enable. And then this is going to have a Boolean of true or false state. Okay, so could probably say state equals opposite state, most likely. Yep. Right. Now there's also this on mouse down. So we'll probably want to call this void on mouse down. So you put your mouse clicky on there. The question is whether that's going to work overall. I may have to do things. I mean, I can certainly make it so that if you just click on it, it'll be on or off. But the thing is that, imagine if that's a big 16 by 16 grid, you do not want to be having to click on each individual item to turn it on or off. Again, for a simple, thing to test, it's probably not a big deal. But I like the idea that on mouse down is here, and we have a Boolean that is a general class pointer enter if Boolean is something like that. So we'll see what happens. Let's see if Boolean drag on makes a sense, and we might need to do something like that. So bool drag on equals false. So my thing will be is that if you click on any one of those objects, it would be on. That might be more independent. Because it'll get to the Boolean that's dragging on only that object, and that doesn't work. So it sounds to me like more like I should be. You know what? I think it would be a better idea if I had a bigger value that was being accessed somehow another way. Yeah. And maybe not with mouse down. Yeah, I think that'd probably be. I think it'd be better to just have something like this. And the state would be that this, and then what we would do in this case would be we would say get component mesh renderer, and then all you have to do is just say enabled equals state, and then we just turn it on or turn it off every time you potentially called that, every time the thing entered in. Okay. And for sure, we want to paint while the button is down. So let's, yeah, I think that seems like something we would want to access. Yeah, probably as a static Boolean or something like that. Yeah, I think that should be global for the whole layer or layer attempt or whatever, for all the objects. All right, so that's going to be interesting to try and figure that one out. That will require a bit of a thing. Probably something on main camera or manager or something like that. Maybe I'll just make a new object and I'll call it interaction manager or something like that. So game object, create empty, call it interaction manager. And then move that up to here. And probably put like, it's not a bad idea to put things like that to get, sorts out. It's easier to track. You have too many objects that are there. So then we'll just add a component, and that'll be pretty easy. That'll just be a new script. And for this, what we'll do is we will say interaction mgr, create and add. Okay, so we'll do that. We'll run that into the editor. And that'll be pretty simple. We're going to basically be looking for update input mouse down and calling this a Boolean. We could technically call it a Boolean with a static variable. If we do that, I don't know whether serialized field will make it variable visible. I don't think it, I'm not 100% sure it will. Static bool basically means that there's just a global and that's all you're going to get. So we can try it. We'll see what happens. Static Boolean mouse down. And yes. And I would say mouse down is equal to false by default. Static Boolean mouse down false. Okay. And then say if input dot get mouse down? No, I think mouse button. I think that's get mouse button down. Probably. And then make that be 0, left mouse button basically. Well, or we could do this, give it more stuff to do. In this case, it would be mouse down is equal to true. And then I would say else if input dot get mouse button down, get mouse button up, and then once again mouse down would be false. So now what we would have is a reference to interaction manager in our mesh renderer control. And technically we could probably just start it if we really wanted to do this. Void start. So void start would then basically say interaction manager mgr, and that could be public or it could not be, but I think I can just wire it up. It's not a problem. It's just be called, at the very beginning of the game, we call it interaction manager. Sorry, manager. So I guess, no, I could say this, I'm sorry. It'd be like mgr equals game object find interaction manager. Yep. And then get component. Interaction manager. Oh no, the get component would be, sorry, that's in angle brackets. Right, interaction manager, angle brackets. So that's basically it. Sorry, that's the one. Okay, so then get define interaction manager, get component interaction manager. Or we could even make it private. That's fine. Probably safer to do private actually. So make it private. And then what's the other bit? Yeah, serialized field. So now what we want to do is we want to look at the Boolean and interaction manager that we're looking for, which is called mouse down. So what we would want to say is if manager dot, oh, right, and we're referring to this, we can't call it static. It has to be public static bool mouse down, and that's the one we're referring to. So manager dot mouse down. Yep. And then you can say if manager dot mouse down, which automatically means true. And then we do these various things. State is equal to opposite state. And then this can potentially work. Yeah, I discovered my mistake. When you're doing static, public static variables, you actually, because of the fact there's only one instance of it, you never have to make an instance. This private interaction manager is an instance of a technically single instance. So if it has a single instance, then it doesn't really need an actual reference. It just can say, hey, this variable on this script, that's the one we're looking at. And it'll be global. And that's the idea, is that every time that mouse down happens, it will revert its state, change its mesh renderer, and change the mesh renderer. And the question is, will it actually work? Or we don't know. I think we have. Yeah, that's the mesh renderer control. Technically, that's on every object. And then the idea is that we have the event. Oh, right, manager doesn't exist. Which is where? Oh, manager game mode, fine. Yeah. We don't have to worry about any of this stuff anymore. So now that we have that going on, what I wanted to do was to see if we could just simply copy over these things and paint them. So in that particular case, what we're going to do is use the same stuff here. But what the problem is that individual editing moment is not that great. But what you can do is you can copy the event trigger if you happen to do that. The problem is that if it goes to the local object, yeah, you might as well almost make a different thing going on. Anyway, I think it's going to have to be a stopping point for now, and we will see you in the next one. This is taking a little longer than I was hoping.